Alright, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I have been a Sonic fan for literally as long as I can remember. Probably even before I developed a consciousness. It started off with me watching YouTube videos of Sonic Adventure 2 when I was like 4 until now, where I have a collection of nearly every single game from the series. Except for the ones that are oddly expensive. Like, can you believe some of these prices? Given my history with the series, it's evident that I've witnessed some of the most interesting releases. People hated 06 and have been split on the series ever since. It doesn't help that recent games have continued the mediocre to bad quality that the series has embodied since 2010. Sonic Forces, Sonic Colors Ultimate, even Sonic Lost World to an extent. The last half-decade has been really bad towards Sonic fans, but when they revealed Sonic Frontiers at the 2021 Game Awards, I grew cautiously optimistic. From this first trailer alone, it already looked better than Forces, which isn't much of a high bar to cross. The hallway-esque levels are seemingly abandoned in favor of a large, beautiful open world, or as Sega likes to call it, open zone, filled with ruins and foreign technology. The enemies chasing Sonic down don't seem like they're a part of Eggman's armada, so maybe a new antagonist, and hopefully a good one at that. With everything Sega had shown up until that point, people were talking. Was this game going to have movement similar to the Adventure series? Is the story going to be on a larger scale similar to Unleashed in 06? How would it run on a console like the Nintendo Switch? Are we gonna get to see more of Sonic's friends outside of Tails, Knuckles, and Amy? Maybe we'll get to see Shadow and Rouge? People were rightfully asking questions due to Sega's track record up until then. But I decided to bite the bullet and go all in on this game. Despite the IGN First Look gameplay trailers that had an absolute goober behind the controller, I chose to pre-order this game as soon as the option was available. Of course it had to be done at GameStop, since they were offering a steelbook that my collection would be incomplete without. I made sure to clear my schedule for when release day hit, so I picked it up, popped it in, and I thought it was alright. Don't get me wrong, I had an amazing time with it, but the end result just left me wanting more from this game, like there was something missing. But I want to go into my thoughts about this game and how I think that it's putting the Sonic franchise on the right track. Now, this first part of the script is written before the Final Horizon update. Don't worry, I'll talk about that at the end, but this first part is going to be completely about the base game. And maybe I'll mention the little update that added all those birthday outfits. I like that a lot. But with that being said, let me tell you why Sonic Frontiers is a step in the right direction. Prior to the release of Frontiers, Sega put out a little prequel comic showing how Sonic, Tails, and Amy all got together in the first place, which I appreciate a lot, and Sonic Team has been doing more for their upcoming releases. Eggman apparently set up a decoy to keep the group away from the Starfall Islands. That's the place where all the Chaos Emeralds mysteriously began to gather. But in terms of the actual game, once you pop it in and press play, it's Eggman who we see first. He's hacking into this mysterious terminal that he claims has the Ancients' technology. As he's doing so, he ends up getting sucked into the terminal itself. What could this mean for the rest of the game? Is this why we didn't see Eggman in much of the promotional material? Skipping past all that, now we see the Sonic gang flying just above the Starfall Islands. That is, until a glitchy red vortex sucks them all into an unknown place. Similar to what happened to Eggman, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence, right? And now you get to take control of Sonic in your first cyberspace level. What's cyberspace, you may be asking? We don't know yet, but it sure looks a lot like Green Hill. The fans are for sure gonna love this. You go through this admittedly short stage, learning about the movement controls, and then get spit out into this completely unknown world. Once Sonic finally comes to, he is spoken to by this ominous voice, telling him that he is the key, whatever that means. It's here where we get our first taste of open zone action on the first island of the game, Kronos Island. Of course, there's a learning area teaching you the basics of the game, Stuff like combat, the puzzles that aren't really puzzles, and how you go about collecting things. But it also teaches you about Sonic's new ability, the Psyloop. This is what was shown in teasers, where Sonic has this weird bluish-purple glitchy trail following him. You can use this in combat scenarios, puzzles, and even to restock your rings by just running around in a circle with it activated. Once you've learned all the basics, the game decides to throw you into 2 mini-boss battles with a very limited attack arsenal. Throughout this game, there are numerous mini-bosses, known as Guardians, who vary in difficulty, with all of them mostly having a gimmick or a singular move that you can use to take them out. While at the beginning of the game, when you have a more limited attack arsenal, you only really have the Psyloop and basic punches and kicks to defeat these guys. As you defeat more enemies and Guardians throughout the game, you get experience to unlock new combat mechanics. These can be as simple as the Phantom Rush, which just makes Sonic attack really fast once you build up a large enough combo, to as game-breaking as the Quick Psyloop, allowing you to easily deal with some of the more peskier enemies. Defeating these Guardians rewards you with portal gears, which are in turn used to enter more cyberspace levels. So if the cyberspace levels are practically the levels from the games following the boost formula, what makes this any different than a game like Colors or Forces? Well, the cyberspace levels are a smaller part of what the game has to offer, and actually can provide somewhat of a challenge with all the objectives they offer. Every level has 4 objectives, one for beating it with an S-rank time, one for collecting a certain number of rings, one for gathering all the hidden red rings in a stage, and one for just reaching the goal. I know I said that they were somewhat of a challenge, but to be honest, they really aren't. The times you have to try and achieve aren't too insanely low like in Adventure 2 or in Unleashed, and you'll typically get enough rings to meet the requirement for that as well. And at least for me, I would gather all of the red rings within my first 2 attempts of the level, not really having to search out for any of them. I think it's admirable that they tried to add a bit more challenge into these admittedly simple levels, and some of them will actually require a bit of mastery in how you move, such as in 1-2, which is the one that everyone hates perfecting. But having these levels be a subsection of what the main game is, makes it so much better than a game filled with these. I haven't even mentioned how cyberspace is a digital world that stores all the memories of those who enter, making it so that the cyberspace levels follow theming based on Green Hill, Chemical Plant, Sky Sanctuary, or Speed Highway, which is an actual decent canon reason to reuse these level concepts. Some of the stages even follow stage layouts of past entries in the Sonic franchise, such as 2-6, which is a carbon copy of Sky Rail from Sonic Adventure 2. Thankfully, they didn't do this for every stage, but when it does pop up, it feels like a nice callback rather than a forced nostalgia trip. So, what do these cyberspace levels reward you with? Depending on how many of the objectives you clear off, you'll get that many vault keys, which are used to unlock the Chaos Emerald vaults spread out throughout the island. Finally, the whole reason they came to these islands! As you're exploring the island, you'll come across one of your friends, locked up in a cyber cage. For Kronos Island, it's Amy, for Ares Island, it's Knuckles, and for Chaos Island, it's Tails. Wait, Knuckles? But he wasn't on the plane with the rest of the group. Well, days before Sonic Frontiers released, Sega put out a small animation showing Knuckles getting sucked into the same type of terminal that Eggman got absorbed into because, somehow, one was present on Angel Island. It seems like when everybody got sucked into cyberspace, no one else other than Sonic was able to escape, and so they ended up in these red, spiky cages, unable to interact with the physical world. In order to free them from these cages, you need to go around and collect their specific memory tokens, and once you get enough, you're able to free your friends. Awesome! Another collectible! Most of these are collected through small platforming sections floating around the island or present in the land's topography. People have rightly complained about this, with the biggest problem being that Sega can't seem to distance themselves from 2D gameplay being forced into 3D Sonic games. See, once you approach these platforming sections, you'll be locked into doing them, meaning you can't freely control the camera anymore and you don't have much opportunity to drop out of doing it. And most of the time, the camera will pan to the side to give you a 2D angle. This was really disappointing to find out. Sonic Team gave out the impression that the 2D stuff would remain separate from games advertised as being 3D, and when a bulk of the gameplay involves you going through mandatory platforming sections, a large chunk of which being 2D, it just makes me feel as if the development process hasn't evolved, and that Sonic Team can't get a good idea as to what they want the 3D game style to be like. Here's a tip. People loved the Sonic stages from Adventure 1 and 2. Heck, even 06 had some decent level design just being held back by buggy gameplay. Maybe stepping back and creating fully fleshed out levels that take advantage of Sonic's unique movement style might be a good idea. But what do I know? I've only sat by as fans of the series have thrown complaint after complaint at the series I love so dearly for the past 17 years or so. Anyways, once you free Sonic's friends, the cyber energy that was holding them captive gets absorbed by Sonic, corrupting him more and more as you progress throughout the game, but that's only going to be a problem later on. An interesting detail about this is as Sonic gets more corrupted, he'll have different idle animations, showing the impact that this corruption is having on him. After freeing Amy on Kronos Island, you're free to do pretty much anything, even collecting the Chaos Emeralds. As you're doing so, a giant island guardian somehow appears right in front of you, leading to a cutscene where a mysterious floating girl tells you that you need to leave the island now. Sonic's not one to back down, so he ends up getting rocked by the Titan, so it looks like those Chaos Emeralds are going to be used for something after all. The game decides to balance its open world collecting gameplay with lore dumps, usually being initiated by interacting with one of Sonic's friends in their digital state. Through this, we learn that the race of ancients who inhabited these islands were all wiped out by an entity known as the End, leaving only their spirits which live on through the cocoa of the island. In many of these flashback cutscenes, you'll notice that the ancients look an awful lot like Chaos from a Sonic adventure. Well, they were actually confirmed to be ancestors of the Chow, and have a lot more connection to the echidnas than previously believed, as evidenced by the cyberspace terminal on Angel Island. More of the lore behind them gets revealed towards the climax of the game, so I suppose I'll hold off on it for now, as interesting as it is. But Amy spends her time reuniting the Coco and allowing them to achieve peace and pass on, which is very fitting for her character. The game will require you to interact with the Coco in order for you to gain Chaos Emeralds, mainly by completing minigames regarding the Coco. Amy's going to help reunite a mother with her children, Knuckles is going to make you carry the Coco away from danger, and Tails will make you break boxes to collect parts to repair a cannon for the Coco. What does all of this accomplish? Well, it helps the Coco find peace and pass on, something that Tails brings worry towards, but Sonic shoots him down, affirming that they are helping the Coco by allowing them to pass on peacefully. Some of these cutscenes can actually be a bit emotional, watching the Coco live through memories of battle and their past lives as the ancients, watching ancients reunite only to pass away immediately after. I went in thinking that these guys were just going to be like the Chow from the Adventure series, obviously holding a little bit of story prevalence, but mainly being remembered through the Chow Garden as little guys. Thankfully, Sega decided to use these guys in a more effective manner and help build up the world of Sonic. So for anyone who doesn't think this game accomplishes anything, you should at least be able to acknowledge this. As you explore the island collecting keys for the Chaos Emeralds, you may come across that same floating girl, named Sage, from earlier. She also requires memory tokens in order to interact with her, but I say go for it. Since you're already going to be collecting a ton of them, you might as well receive all the game has to offer. Through repeated interactions with her, you learn that she's an AI developed by Eggman, whose main goal is to harness the technology of the ancients. She's able to gain control over all of the ancients' technology, which is how she had control over the giant titans of each island. She actually explained it saying that she harnessed the ancients' anger and targeted it towards Sonic, but that's a little too complicated. I'd rather just say she has control over all of it. Despite this, Eggman is still trapped within cyberspace, and we get to see his and Sage's interactions over time, and how she slowly begins to develop emotions and a desire for companionship by watching how Sonic interacts with his friends. Despite everything I've gone over, there's still more to collect and do on each one of the islands. Scattered around several of the ruins across the islands are the Coco from earlier, You can collect them and return them to the Hermit Coco, who in return boosts either your speed stat, allowing you to go faster obviously, or your ring stat, allowing you to hold more rings. Now, I never increased my ring count, and that's because whenever you collect the maximum number of rings you can hold, Sonic gains a massive power boost, where he goes so much faster and has this electrifying blue aura around him. Collecting more rings just makes it a longer goal to achieve, although not really, since you can just do a repeated side loop to get rings out of it. Along with the Hermit Coco is the Coco Elder. He takes the seeds you gain by completing puzzles and converts them into either attack or defensive boosts. Thankfully, the areas in which you can receive them are all marked on your map, so you don't even have to do an extensive amount of hunting for them. This part is completely off script, but I don't know how I forgot to mention the purple coins and how you can collect them via exploring the island or by gambling during the Shooting Stars events. You can use these purple coins to go fishing with Big. What does fishing with Big accomplish? Well, if you collect fish, he'll give you things in return for them. It's pretty useful and is a nice, calm, and relaxing way to spend some of your time in the game. But wait, what if your map is incomplete like mine? Well, that's simple. Just complete the numerous puzzles scattered throughout the game, and doing so will fill out more of your map and show you where more of the game's collectibles are. It's a really simple exploration process, not too dissimilar to games like Breath of the Wild, which Frontiers got ample comparisons to upon its reveal. Now that we've gone over all the stuff you can do, let's get into the main thing you're collecting, the Chaos Emeralds. So those titans on all the islands seem pretty insurmountable, but with the help of the Chaos Emeralds, it's actually incredibly easy. For anyone out there who doesn't know, once Sonic collects all 7 Chaos Emeralds, he has the ability to enter his super form. In this form, he can fly, has incredible speed and power, is basically immortal. It's insane, except for the fact that doing so will drain his ring count. It's about 1 ring per second, so you need to be smart with how you use it. To match the insanity of Super Sonic, these fights with the Titans are crazy. You all know how I'm a sucker for video game music, so the sound team decided to go with heavy freaking metal for all those boss fights, and it fits so well. So these battles are just Super Sonic against a ginormous Titan who's throwing punches or firing missiles or having a giant sword to attack you with, all while there's high energy metalcore playing in the background to motivate you and show you how truly absurd it is for Sonic to go up against these extremely powerful Titans. Not to mention how this music serves as great music to listen to while working out.
It's time to face your fears when your time has come and gone. I'll be the one to carry on, and you can throw me to the walls, 'cause I am undefeatable.
Once you beat these bosses, also in an over-the-top fashion, with Sonic picking up a giant sword and cutting the Titan in half for one of them, you fly off to the next island within the Starfall Island system. The next 2 islands are similar. Ares Island is a sandy one that has some really good backing music. Knuckles serves as the Coco's military general as they relive experiences they had as the Ancients, and you fight a floating Titan named Wyvern, which is totally badass. It's nice to see Knuckles regain a lot of the competence he had been lacking ever since Sonic 06. Ever since then, he's been portrayed as this bumbling idiot who's only good for his strength, when he was actually written to be a socially naive introvert who prefers the solidarity of living on his own island and protecting the Master Emerald, all while having this friendly rivalry with Sonic and caring about him and the rest of his friends. So it makes me really happy to see one of my favorite characters be portrayed the way he was originally written. After Ares Island, you move on to Chaos Island, a volcanic wasteland which has islands that are way more difficult to access due to the bottomless pits of fog between them and the few grind rail opportunities you have to get over there. Jumping ahead, this island probably has the most iconic Titan from the game, Knight. This is the Titan with the giant sword that Sonic ends up using to cut the thing right in half, all while one of the game's best tracks is playing. Similar to the other islands, this one has ruins of the ancient civilization all throughout it. including some heavy artillery cannons used to defend against the End. It's here where we rescue Tails, who feels it's his duty to help repair the cannons for the Coco to help them pass on. Similar to Knuckles, Tails also returns to his old characterization and goes through a bit of growth and reflection as well. If you didn't know, Tails has always been Sonic's sidekick, but in the adventure games, he steps into a bigger role and out of Sonic's shadow to directly challenge Eggman in several instances. But ever since then, he's shrunk down to be almost unrecognizable from how he was portrayed in the adventure games, the most notable example of which being in Sonic Forces, where he cowers in fear from an illusion of Chaos Zero, literally one of the easiest bosses in the series, even though he had literally gone up against some of the more advanced versions of this creature in Sonic Adventure. People were just tired of how Sega had forced all these characters into these stereotypical roles. But Tails actually brings up his inconsistency. Yep, he refers to his action in Forces, and says that he needs to continue to grow so that he can become more reliable instead of always crying out for Sonic. In doing so, he says that his next adventure is gonna have to be on his own. You know what that means, baby. Tails Sky Patrol 2, Tails Adventure 2. I love Tails so much, and I hope he gets so many more games. Anyways, hearing that during my first playthrough made me feel a bit sad. Sonic was a bit unprepared to hear this as well, and makes it clear that it's gonna be rough without his trusted sidekick, but he understands why Tails is making this decision. Roger Craig Smith's performance really sells that Sonic has deeper layers than the sarcastic, always optimistic Hedgehog he's played ever since Sonic Freeriders. Now, I don't want to get into a whole debate on who's the best Sonic voice. Many people always associate Sonic with Ryan Drummond from the adventure games. A bunch of people, me included, grew up with Jason Griffith thanks to Sonic X, and a whole new wave of fans have only ever heard Roger Craig Smith due to the Sonic Boom cartoon and Sonic returning back to the mainstream thanks to a more consistent release schedule, even if Forces and Colors Ultimate are two of my least favorites. But I think Roger Craig Smith does an amazing job here. Sure, it sounds a bit weird hearing Sonic express any emotions, and it took me a minute to get used to this new voice direction, but it really helps add a layer of depth to his character that we've only really seen in the IDW comics. Also, really quickly, I'm going to shortly mention, because I don't know where else to put it, but this game was actually written by Ian Flynn, head writer of the IDW comics, and like how I mentioned that Tails brings up his past failures, several other moments from prior Sonic games are brought up too, kind of tying a knot between the canon and making each of the stories somewhat relevant since the characters still refer to them. We visited the 3 major islands. Now it's time for the story dump island, Rhea Island, and I'm 90% sure I pronounced that incorrectly. That same voice that told Sonic that he was the key now tells him to silence the 6 towers. These are nice vertical platforming challenges where the reward is finding out more about the Ancients. We learned that they originally had to flee their home planet from an entity called the End. They harnessed the power of the Chaos Emeralds and fled to Earth since the Emeralds were drawn to the Master Emerald. On Earth, they created cyberspace so that all their memories and data could be conserved even if the End comes back to kill them all. On Earth, they also construct the Titans to try and defend themselves against the End. And as we know, the End comes back and wreaks havoc on the Ancients, killing and destroying everything that they had built up while on their new planet. To try and defend themselves against the End, a group of Ancients mount their Titans and attempt to take the Chaos Emeralds to the Master Emerald. When this proves unsuccessful, the pilot of the Supreme Titan chooses to sacrifice themselves by binding their Titan to the End and getting sealed in cyberspace. The remaining Ancients flee to Angel Island and presumably devolve into the Chow due to the specific properties of the Master Emerald. But this all happened 1,000 years ago, so why does it matter now? Well, as a result of Sonic silencing the towers, it freed everyone from cyberspace. Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Eggman, and even the End. So everything's looking a bit grim now that the planet-destroying, species-killing deity has returned. And on top of that, freeing everyone from cyberspace means that Sonic became too corrupted to carry on, and is stuck motionless between realities with red and black coursing throughout his body. Could Sega have made this a cool new form, or let Sonic go through some inner turmoil corrupted levels to return whole again? I mean, sure, that could have been neat, But back in reality, Sonic's friends and Eggman get notified about the end's incoming attack, and come to the conclusion that Sonic could be the only one strong enough to stop it. So Tails, Knuckles, and Amy give up their physical forms and return to cyberspace so that Sonic can return and destroy the end once and for all. Now we get to see one of the few partnerships between Sonic and Eggman, to which Eggman reluctantly admits Sonic into his armada. Literally the best part of the game, since Eggman is one of my favorite characters, when he's written correctly. The two of them have to collect the Chaos Emeralds to fight off the Titan corrupted with the end, Supreme, which is actually one of the more difficult boss battles in the game. Obviously there's going to be banging music, the song for this battle being used in promotional videos for Sonic Frontiers, and it's actually quite a cinematic battle, more so than the other boss battles in this game. You'd think that once Sonic defeats Supreme, that's the end of the game. But no, not really. The end decides to free itself from Supreme and fly up into space, threatening the whole planet now. So, what did the end actually end up being? Is it some super powerful deity similar to Mephiles or Gaia? No, it's just a giant sphere. According to the game's director, Morio Kishimoto, the end takes the form of however the viewer perceives death, which is a really interesting concept. Maybe they could have had the end switching forms during battle because Sonic is viewing it differently as he begins to damage it more. But they decided to keep the giant looming sphere. Great choice. The final boss battle you have against it in space isn't much better. Now this battle is exclusive only to those who chose to play the game in hard mode. And since I'm such a Sonic expert, you already know what difficulty I selected. But this final boss battle is awful. A few times throughout the game, you get tasked with doing a quick bullet hell to progress by hacking a terminal or something stupid. No big deal, it's just a minigame to further progression that shouldn't take too long. Well, the hard mode exclusive boss battle is just another one of these. Well, it's actually different because Sage takes control of the Titan Supreme and Supersonic powers it up to go against the end, and it has a lot more cannon blah 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 blah. Yeah, no. This is an incredibly disappointing note to end the game on. I love it when Sonic games put you up against these colossal, universal threat beings that threaten all of existence as we know it. Stuff like Perfect Chaos, the Bio-Lizard, shit, even Solaris all have battles that hold more weight to them than a bullet hell. Fans were not pleased with this, since this was the first Sonic game in quite a while to not only place importance on Supersonic, but also have a decently written story. Despite this battle, once it's over, there is a pretty sad ending similar to Sonic Adventure 2. Even though Sonic and Sage defeat the end, it doesn't like this, and chooses to blow itself up, to which Sage takes the full brunt of the impact to sacrifice herself for the world's sake, asking Sonic to look after her father. We later see Eggman lamenting the loss of Sage as shooting stars rain the night sky, a really interesting side of his character that I don't believe we've ever seen. Being a Sonic game, this can't be the extent of the story, so after the credits we see Eggman in the dark accessing a terminal of sorts before we hear a familiar voice. If that were the entirety of the game, I think it'd be a really solid entry, but not anything to right all the wrongs that Sonic Team has done. There's just been so much inconsistency with the Sonic franchise that it's hard to predict if Sega wants to continue with this style of gameplay or completely flip it around, something that they've not been shy to do in the past. But Sonic Team had a trick up their sleeves. I can only assume that they heard all the backlash towards the final boss and ending of the game, so they decided to release some brand new, story-focused DLC that gives you the ability to play as Sonic's friends, as well as introducing a brand new form of Supersonic. We haven't seen something like this since Sonic and the Black Knight, also known as my favorite game of all time. But excluding the storybook series, then we haven't seen a new form of Supersonic centered around the Emeralds since Sonic and Knuckles with Hypersonic. If I could use just one word to describe the Final Horizon update, it would have to be difficult. Sega must have heard my opinions on how easy the game was before this video even came out, and they decided to ramp up the difficulty to a 10 for this DLC. extremely tedious platforming that feels really rewarding, a demand for mastery in the combat, and way more importance placed on your stats. One of the most advertised things regarding this update is that you can play as Tails, Knuckles, and Amy. So they retconned the original story, in which Sonic is the one to gather most of the emeralds before fighting the final Titan. That task is now delegated to his friends, who all have really unique and interesting movesets. Since his friends gave up their physical forms, they're still all digitally, but hey, at least they're playable again. Getting the Chaos Emeralds can't be as simple as it was in the base game. Sensing the incoming threat, the Coco decide to beef up their protection of the emeralds and relocate them to places that are far more difficult to reach in the first game. Starting off with Amy, now that Sega is highlighting her interest in tarot cards and fortune readings, a lot of her attacks and movement options revolve around her cards. Normally, characters just get a double jump to help adjust with tricky platforming, but Amy gets a third jump where she slowly floats down with her tarot cards spiraling around her. Amy's movement is a lot more floaty than the rest of the cast, which is an odd coincidence since Nintendo does the same thing whenever Princess Peach is playable. For combat, sadly Amy's hammer is forgotten about. I'm not sure why they chose to have Amy use her tarot cards to attack enemies, since her Pico Pico hammer has been a part of the series since Sonic Adventure. You do get to see the hammer in a movement option where she rides it like a broom while the cards rotate around her, kind of like that one vehicle from Star Wars Episode 3, but it's sad that it's gone since it's always been a part of her character, even in Sonic Boom. But combat remains the same as it did with Sonic, except there's a lot more importance on the parry move. I'll just get it out of the way now. If you cannot perform perfect parries, this DLC will not be for you. Normally, Sonic can just hold the parry button and as soon as the enemy would hit him, he'd parry it. Simple enough, although the timing was extremely generous and I don't believe there was any limit as to how long you could hold down the parry button. But now, enemies and bosses will require a perfect parry, in which the window to perform a parry attack is significantly smaller. Since I hadn't touched the game in a while, I was extremely rusty, so that might explain some of the 9 to 10 hours I spent on the DLC. Back to Amy and the rest of the gang. Amy is first tasked with finding the Emerald Vaults, which are empty since the Coco moved them. Okay, no problem, just gotta find the new ones. Well, like every task in this update, to reach the new Emerald Vaults, you have to go through some really tricky platforming. And I mean like insanely tricky to the point where in some cases, you need to have specific upgrades for your character in order to even progress. But once you finally reach a Chaos Emerald Vault, you switch over to Knuckles, since the thing is locked. Knuckles has always been an interesting character. For some reason, even though he's never been known as the fastest, he's always felt quicker than the others, especially in Sonic Adventure 2. Thankfully, they changed this, and now Sonic is back to feeling the fastest. But Knuckles has some less than desirable movement traits. He's always been known for his glide. How would an echidna glide? I don't know, but it always felt nice and responsive, making the Knuckles stages in Sonic Adventure 2 speedruns be some of the shorter times throughout the run. But here, I don't know, they made all directional input too sensitive, and before you even start a glide, he does this weird animation that really isn't necessary. It still feels good when he's climbing up walls though. With Knuckles' unique movement, his platforming sections are a lot more vertical than Amy or Tails', but I never had much trouble with it. I mean, every time I messed up, I knew it was because of me, and I couldn't blame poor level design or shoddy controls, so that's good on Sega's part. Knuckles' upgrades come in the form of him getting better punching combos and maneuvers, which I love since I'm a Knuckles stan. His Fire Punch combo even returned from Sonic Adventure 2, but he doesn't say his number one line from Sonic Heroes. It's no surprise that the backing track for the Knuckles section is the best, since his level music has always been iconic. As Knuckles, it's your duty to destroy an impact form Coco. Since the DLC just released, I can't exactly say with 100% certainty that I know what all these guys are used for, but from what I played, it seems like these guys are used to solidify the online defenses for the Chaos Emerald Vaults, and by Knuckles destroying them, it weakens the signal so Tails can go in and hack all the Chaos Emerald vaults open. Speaking of Tails, man, is it great for him to be playable again. And like every other game with Tails in it, he just breaks all the platforming since he can fly above it and skip it, making his platforming sections a bit easier, if not more intimidating, since it's all in the sky and one wrong move will send you plummeting down to the ground. Thankfully, he has his classic hindrance of getting tired after a while, so you can't just fly forever, but it still makes for some of the easier platforming sections. That would be the case if there was not abysmal pop-in. Sonic Frontiers sadly suffers from pop-in, and it has since launch. Platforms and rails and stuff will just pop into existence when you get close enough to them, making stuff in the distance impossible to see. That isn't much of a problem until you get to Tails or Knuckles' section. Since their platforming tasks are so vertical, it gets hard to find out where to go for them. Like for this singular Tails section, you have to somehow make it way above the pyramid on Oranos Island. Okay, start at the pyramid and work backwards to figure out where to begin. But no, there was nothing to show me where to go around the pyramid. So I had to make my way up an unrelated set of platforms and pray that when I flew up as high as I could, I would be able to see the path to get there. Thankfully, it all worked out in the end, and I made my way up there and enjoyed doing so. But if somehow they could fix the pop-in and missing platforms in the distance, it would make life so much easier. Tails also has a moveset similar to his prior incantations. Yes, that even means his inability to homing attack, so they replaced it with Tails throwing wrenches at enemies and objects. I like it, but where does he get that many wrenches? But guess what's back? The Tornado 2, oh my god. With how much I've played Sonic Adventure 2, this was just so welcome. It almost brings a tear to my eye. Like how Sonic gets super fast when he fills up the ring counter, Tails gets a plane, which doesn't seem equal, but okay. Something I like a lot, but don't know where to put it, is that Tails doggy paddles in water, just like he did in the classic games. It's the little details like these that make me glad that there's someone behind the scenes who cares a lot about the pre-established conventions of Sonic games. But once you go through the platforming sections with Tails and hack the vaults open, it's back to Sonic you go. Before gaining access to this update, I was wondering how Sonic was going to get this new super form, and I must say the way you go about it is extremely worthwhile and rewarding. Sage informs Sonic that there's someone to help him harness his cyber corruption and power up through it, but to do so requires a bit of a challenge. Sonic's tasked with completing the trials of the Titan pilots, who are located at the tops of these absolutely giant towers. Like, take the platforming towers from Rhea Island, make them about twice as high and a lot more difficult. The number of times I overcorrected on a jump and fell all the way down was too many to count, and it was so demoralizing. But since I wanted to get this video out as soon as possible for you all, I stuck through it. What a brave and noble trooper I am. In order to gain access to the towers, you must find Lookout Coco. These guys are basically the vault keys of the DLC, since they're obtained through exploration and cyberspace levels. You'd think they're pretty easy to get, since cyberspace has never been too bad. But like with everything else in this update, the new cyberspace levels are some of the most difficult levels in all of Sonic. I genuinely mean this. The requirements change from the original. Now you don't get anything for any of the original requirements. Introduced here is Shadow Tails, whom you race against through the stages. All I'm gonna say is that in order to beat him, you're gonna need an S rank time for like every stage. And those aren't too easy to come by. The stage layout, branching pathways, shortcuts, and enemy placement makes it so you need to master not only Sonic's movement, but your memorization of the stage. As I would be going through these things, I would be making note of every spring, every zipline, every pulley, just so that I could better my times in order to beat Shadow Tails and get an S rank. Replacing red rings is silver rings. Practically the same concept, except they're a lot more out of the way, and you have to be far more observant. In addition to silver rings are the numbered rings. These babies have only appeared in the hit games Sonic Lost World and Sonic Forces. What you have to do is collect them all in order, starting with 5 and going all the way down to 1. If you so much as collect 1 out of order, all your progress will go away. And if that wasn't difficult enough, now flickies are back. What's a flicky? It's the animal trapped inside of Eggman's robots, duh. Did you never play the cult classic Sonic 3D Blast? Here, there are going to be 3 of them in the stage, and your job is to pick them up on your back and carry them to safety, which typically isn't too far away from where you find them. Although you can't homing attack, and you can't get hit by anything. It's pretty difficult is what I'm saying, especially in a stage where the literal ground is crumbling beneath your feet. I'm not ashamed to admit that I haven't done any of these extra tasks, since they're so hard. But rest assured knowing that I will continue to grind until I've mastered everything this game has to offer. With these, it's almost as if Sega made these way more harder than they should have, to balance out how easy the cyberspace stages were in the original release. I love a challenge, so these are great to play through, even if they made me want to curl up and die sometimes. Before you ask, yes, you do still need portal gears to play the cyberspace levels, and yes, you still get them from Guardians. But this time, they're a lot harder, so you might just be better off finding them by sci-looping some spots on the ground. Now that we've finally gotten all that out of the way, it's time to talk about the trials. Sonic goes through these to prove his worthiness to the deceased pilots of the Titans, and these can be really hard if you don't have the right moves or an advanced level of understanding behind the combat. You'll be thrown into a room with a bunch of difficult enemies, and all of your stats are going to be reset to 0. So that attack boost you enjoyed is gone. The first 4 trials can be tedious, but they're not too bad if you're determined enough. But the 5th trial, oh my god, the 5th trial, I spent 3 hours on this one alone. Trust me, checking the time was way more worthwhile than dying over and over again. The 5th trial is with the leader of the Coco, Master King Coco. And in order to see if Sonic is strong enough for him to bless with this new upgrade, this motherfucker will put you through every boss in the game, minus Supreme, in a row, with no way to recover rings. So if you were like me, you're going to be regretting your decision not to upgrade your ring capacity. Oh, and don't worry, he also resets your attack and defense boosts. I spent hours perfecting my parry, which has to be perfect, by the way, memorizing attack patterns and straight up just praying that would be the time that I would get through it. Despite my frustrations with the trial, it gave me a greater appreciation for these bosses, and I feel a little bad for not talking about them more earlier in the video, so I'll make up for it here really fast. I love these boss battles now. Finding out the perfect attack combination to get the most damage in a short amount of time is exhilarating. Finding out that a quick Psy-loop will send these guys floating in the air for you to just wail on them, or in the case of Wyvern, bind him in chains so that you can get tons of damage in is crazy. Parrying Wyvern's missiles back at it in order to speed up the attack cycle and begin to damage him earlier is something I didn't find out until halfway through my attempts, so that was great, but really cool. Hopping on top of Knight's shield in order to ride it back and hit Knight all while the Titan is bouncing you around the map with missiles is nerve-wracking, since sometimes you can just never reach it if you're unlucky. And the music, oh my god, I'm sorry to mention it again and to throw in another workout compilation, but come on. Through all my time grinding these battles, I have memorized every word of these songs. Alright, back to the new content. Once you get through this, and trust me, you will, I believe in you, Sonic gains control over his cyberspace corruption, and then you have the option to go straight to the final battle. But before that, I had to get some much needed stat increases. Remember how I briefly mentioned the purple coins used for fishing? Well, normally you get a ton of them during the shooting star events, but now the star events have a different purpose. As the stars fall down and you pick them up, you'll be blessed with either a ton of Coco for speed and ring upgrades, or attack and defense seeds. And when I say a ton, I mean like a ton. One shooting star event gave me enough Coco to level up my ring count from level 1 all the way to level 76. But once you're ready for the final boss, it's time to get at it. Like they promised him, Sonic's friends all got him the emeralds. Except for the purple one, but you know who has that?
You guys are the best. What does that make me?
I genuinely think this is some of Eggman's best dialogue, and Mike Pollock's line delivery with it is just great. Eggman is an S-tier villain, and I will die on that hill. With all the emeralds in hand, Sonic obviously becomes Super Sonic and fights supreme, just like in the base game. The fight is the exact same, even with the giant sniper rifle that gets used like once, even with the wings sprouting out during the second phase to look like a Shin Megami Tensei or a Final Fantasy boss. But once you think it's over, the giant purple sphere comes down to power this Titan up and make it a lot more of a notable final boss. To give it that Sonic final boss look, 5 more arms sprout out of the thing's back to make it become one of the coolest looking final bosses in the series. Sega decided to ramp up the cinematics for this battle, and Sonic is given a whole new energy when he harnesses the power of cyberspace. Now, I've heard people refer to this as Super Sonic 2, but I've also heard this be referred to as Super Cyber Sonic, which sounds a heck of a lot cooler, so I'll use that. As Super Cyber Sonic, Sonic has a lot more strength, and this is made evident in battle. He'll just brush off lasers from the end like they're nothing, and he has this insane speed blitz he performs if the end tries to rush him, all while having this incredibly serious look on his face the whole time with blue eyes and a reddish aura around him. This battle also took me a bit of time, since the strategy here is to sever the connection from the end to the Titan, since normally the end would just be healing itself if you didn't, but it's kind of hard to solely target the back of the Titan's neck, but trust me, it's possible. Once you lower the Titan's health, it's your duty to get that sniper rifle away from it. This can just be done by side-looping it away from the end. And now, it's Eggman's turn to get in on the action, so he takes control of the sniper and shoots Sonic through the Titan and through the giant purple sphere, putting an end to this game. Man, was that exciting! A lot more challenge offered throughout the new update, new characters, a better ending, all while not feeling too out of place from the base game. We even get a nice closing cutscene showing Eggman treating Sage as his own daughter. I'm telling you, he is an amazing character. Before this update came out, I said that this was a good entry in the series, but not anything too spectacular. My thoughts have changed greatly due to this update. To now, I believe it is a top 5 Sonic game of all time. Be it due to the story, the difficulty, the acknowledgement of the series lore, or even the new direction Sega took by turning this into an open world game, a lot of risks were taken with this game, and thankfully, Sega listened to what the fans had to say, and refined this into some of the best gaming content of 2023. So to answer the question that's in this video's thumbnail, Sonic is back, and there's a lot more of him to come. Hey guys! This was a real challenge to make, especially with how quickly I had to play through the DLC and write out the rest of this script and edit, you get it. But this was a really fun game to come back and play. It brought me back to when I first played about a year ago, and I had a far better time with it now. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear me talk more about games in the future, just go ahead and click that subscribe button. Sonic Superstars is coming out in a few weeks, and you already know I'm going to have to talk about it. Let me know what you thought of Sonic Frontiers and the new update down in the comments below. Do you hate the difficulty? Does it make you want to get better? Are you even going to bother with all this new content? I'm loving everything that the community has to say about it, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are too. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'm going to go master those new cyberspace levels now.